Welcome to the Critical Christian Podcast.
We're your host, Dan.
And Justin. We ask critical questions about the Bible and provide questionable answers.
Whether you like it or not.
Usually not. Dan, we're in chapter 49 of Genesis this week.
We are.
Do you remember what happened last week in chapter 48?
I do.
Yeah, can you give us a recap?
Jacob was giving out blessings to Joseph and his two children. That is it.
Yeah, well,
all that happened.
Basically, right? The whole chapter is dedicated to Jacob blessing Ephraim and Manasseh, which is really interesting.
Right, since they're not any of his 12 children.
Right. And then, oddly enough, Joseph gets a huge blessing in this chapter. Now we're going to see the blessing of the other 12 tribes.
Nice.
And we'll talk about Joseph when we get there.
And that's going to be exciting then, I think.
But it's interesting, though, that like the whole chapter is dedicated to Ephraim and Manasseh.
Yeah.
Then, and then the whole next chapter is the rest of them. With some outstanding elements.
Ulterior motives by the authors or anything.
Not at all. There's no way that any of this is written after the fact, hundreds of years later,
never.
Using information that has been ascertained from many years of history.
It'll be a little dishonest.
Of course.
Obviously, they're not going to do that.
It's all just straight prophecy.
Prophecy. So many prophecies. Might as well call it the prophecy book.
Yeah, so what we saw in chapter 48, remember, there's a kind of this prophetic idea that, the children of Joseph will receive a portion, and a portion in Hebrew is a word play on the name Shechem, indicating that Shechem is going to be a kind of a prominent city in their land of inheritance. Which
they like their very not funny wordplay.
There's a lot. In fact, there were so many in chapter 48, I just didn't list them. We could spend the entire hour talking about word plays, and we could bore everybody. The fact of the matter is, if you know biblical Hebrew, read chapter 48 in Hebrew. It's wild. It's a crazy ride.
Be in stitches.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's not really all that important. There's only one or two word plays that I pulled out that are kind of important to the text. So with that out of the way, Dan, let's read verse 1.
All right. And Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather together, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last." That's spooky, last days.
Right.
I assume he just means the last days of his life, since clearly dying.
Yeah, so I was curious of the phrase "last days." Like, it seems I like the New King James Version, but I think they got this one wrong. It is true that the term for last days, which is be'akarit, that meaning afterwards, basically, or in the latter. So you've got a couple things happening there, and then the second word is hayamim. So you've got a compound phrase meaning in the latter or in the thing that comes after. The Hebrew word akar just means something that comes after something else, or it could mean something that's behind something else. So it's saying in the latter days, right? But I think a better translation is just in the days to come, or in the distant future.
In the days to come, that's what the Message says. So, pretty spot on, I think.
Yeah, the Message has never got a translation wrong,
what's interesting is it feels like what he's saying is, in the days before I die. But that's not true, because he doesn't talk about his death or anything.
No.
So he's clearly talking about the coming future, like in the next few
hundreds of years, yeah.
Yeah, longer than just a couple of days to come,
Well, everything that's predicted in this chapter is hundreds of years down the road, right? It's just pure coincidence that a lot of stuff that is in this chapter lines up with stuff that you'll find in like Judges and Deuteronomy and
it's coincidence.
Joshua and Chronicles.
Are you making it funny?
No.
What do you mean it's just coincidence?
I mean, it's prophetic is what I meant to say.
Oh, it is, but now you're joking.
No, I'm joking. Yeah. I mean, Honestly, commentators from the olden days all would have said that this is, well, it's just prophetic.
That would be.
Yeah, I don't
I mean,
believe
I'm
that.
just saying you can't write something and also write the future thingies. Or just clean up my words there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting here too because the narrative is really, the way it's written is really rough. Like Jacob keeps talking about himself in the third person. There's a lot of weird stuff in here.
Okay. So these prophecies are fulfilled in what book?
They're kind of all over the place.
Well, just the main ones.
Well, we'll talk about each one when we get there.
Oh, are we?
There's only like 20 of them.
Is he talk? Oh, he talks about all the prophecies.
I mean, I do.
Well, in this thing I'm in.
Well, you might not, when you read through them, you might not have realized they were prophecies.
Yeah, because yeah.
But that's what he says. He says that I may tell you what.
I really thought he was just talking about before he died.
No, definitely not.
That's
Because all the events happened hundreds of years after.
right. Now I have to just do all my notes over again.
Everything that Jacob is saying here is talking about things that correlate with the individual tribes.
Okay.
Right? Now, if you didn't know anything else from the Bible, if you only had Genesis, a lot of what's in here would be really strange to read. You're like, why is it making all these weird predictions? But if you read through the predictions and then you know what then the rest of the Bible, it makes a lot of sense. He's basically describing the future that a lot of these tribes are going to have, and you can read about that future later on in the books.
Right.
So I think that's all that's happening here. Is this is basically a political text like we saw elsewhere,
right? Yeah.
To give justification for the position of each tribe within the land.
That's
seems pretty political to me.
terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible thing to do.
Yeah, because the last chapter didn't seem political at all, did it?
No. Not at all.
Well, let's read.
Quite a change.
Yeah, let's read on. Let's do verse 2 here.
Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. The plot thickens. Probably not using that expression right, but isn't it interesting that in verse 1 the narrator calls him Jacob, and in verse 2 he says Israel? Actually, no, he says Jacob and Israel in the same sentence. Can you imagine this conversation even happening, though? Gather, ye sons of Jacob, also called Israel, also called your father. At least that's what Dan thinks. I'm Dan, by the way.
It's a strange sentence. You wouldn't really think in your mind that those words would leave Jacob's lips. Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father. Why are you talking about yourself in third person? It's so weird. No one does that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what this would say about the authorship to use both names.
Right. It certainly sounds like originally the narrative was in third person, and that at some point some editors tried to put the words on Jacob's lips so that it would sort of come authoritatively from Jacob.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
For the prophecies to have more weight.
Exactly. Yeah. So it wasn't just that someone is saying, "Hey, well, once upon a time Jacob said these things, and here's kind of what he said."
Right.
That's probably what was originally in there. Originally was just a third person account of what happened, and then somebody said, this would be more authoritative. In fact, it might even be a better story if we just have literal quotations from Jacob.
Right.
Right. And so they kind of crammed it into Jacob's, into his words.
I really have a problem with stuff like this. With all the people reading this and, just assuming it's all true. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's worded so weirdly. And people are just like, well, that makes perfect sense to me.
Right.
This doesn't make sense to anybody.
No, if Moses is just sitting down and writing all of this out as God told him, you wouldn't see a lot of these features in the narrative. It wouldn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
And if Moses was writing this about Jacob, then he would be writing in the third person. He wouldn't be writing in the first person, but making it sound like it's in the third person. That's just not how narratives work.
I mean, they say that the Bible is one of those beautiful pieces of literature out there. But I mean, you try writing this in a regular book and people are going to call you out for it, right?
Yeah.
They'll be like, pick a person,
Yep.
Weird.
So Jacob and Israel are prominent features in the chapter. He kind of goes back and forth between calling himself Jacob and Israel. I think there's 10 mentions, 5 of each. And so that's interesting. The entire narrative, according to Richard Elliott Freeman, until you get to the very end, the summary, is all from the Yahwist.
Okay.
Which is really interesting. That being said,
that's north or south. What? I can never keep
south.
I can never keep track of these.
I know
things.
the Yahwist is probably from Jerusalem, but definitely from the tribe of Judah, right? Which makes sense when we see what you get in the chapter. But
Judah was good friends with Ephraim and Manasseh, right?
No, not really. That's the problem. Is
okay.
So, like Richard Elliott Freeman attributes this whole narrative, at least the editing of it, to the Yahwist. But honestly, it really feels like they mixed a northern and a southern text together.
I mean, that's what they did, right?
That's clearly what happened. Yeah. It's possible that the last editor of the text was the Yahwist, but they're clearly using multiple traditions, and that I think that'll become clear as we read it.
How come we can't edit it anymore?
I mean, people have tried.
It was okay for them back in the day, but now it's like, it's perfect now.
Well, I mean, the Mormons did.
Yeah, but they're crazy.
I mean, you know,
Mormonism is a cult. Anyone listening?
I mean, don't say that to a Mormon. Say they're the only ones got it right.
I would definitely say that to
them. Anyways,
they probably don't visit my house.
It seems somewhat clear here that the invocation of Israel over and over again, it seems to be a plot device or a tool in the narrative used to focus the reader on the nation of Israel. Yeah. Like they want you to start thinking in nationalistic terms.
Hey, we never spoke about Israel before Jacob wrestled with the angel or what have you, and the name was bestowed upon him, correct?
Yeah.
Is it possible that never happened and they just needed a reason to start writing Israel before the actual nation was created? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's quite possible that there were multiple source narratives. One had a guy named Jacob and another one had a guy named Israel. And they had to find a way to combine the two into one narrative.
Well, I'm just saying the nation of Israel does not exist at this point, correct?
Right.
Like nothing even related to Israel, right? It's all Jacob and his sons.
Right.
And yet early on, they mention how Jacob got his name changed to Israel. I'm saying, is the only reason that happened so that the authors can write the word Israel into Genesis so that there's some sort of a trail that can lead up to the nation of Israel, even though this stuff otherwise maybe couldn't have tracked as well?
I don't think so.
I said all that just for you to say you don't think so?
Yeah, I think what's happening in the wrestling of the angel narrative is there were originally multiple traditions. One from a guy named Jacob and one guy named Israel. The one Israel probably more important, right? But you've got a problem. Well, if you've got the northern kingdoms and the southern kingdom of Benjamin and Judah combining at some point, you've got multiple narratives out there. Somehow you have to combine those narratives. You can't just get rid of them because people believe in these ancient histories. You got to combine it somehow, just like they combined the name of El and the name of Yahweh.
Yeah,
that's in Exodus chapter 6. So there's definitely kind of a thing here with the whole Israel.
Do we have any documents where they're separated? You know what I mean? Before they decided to bring all these documents together and make them all nice and confusing.
Well, we don't have any ancient Hebrew documents. Our oldest Hebrew documents basically come from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay. And those are from anywhere between the 3rd and the 1st century BCE. And there's one tiny little scroll, actually 2 of them. They're called amulets from Ketef Hinnom. They're silver scrolls, and there's like a little tiny quotation from the book of Numbers on them.
Okay.
And those are from the 6th century BCE. So we don't really have a lot of actually ancient manuscripts. We've got manuscripts that are hundreds and hundreds of years after the fact.
Yeah.
So basically, at the time Jacob lived, we're assuming is, I don't know, 1800-ish.
Okay.
So we don't get manuscripts for at least another 1,000 years.
2,000 years, right?
No.
Because you
1,000.
said it was like 5 BC or something.
No, the earliest manuscript is 6th century.
Yeah.
Which is 500s.
Whatever.
Right, because the century is 100. Right,
So
so
like
it's over 1,000
years.
years before you get any manuscripts.
Okay.
Right.
Oh.
Now, there were ancient manuscripts. We just don't have them.
So there were ones that were written 1,500 years ago?
Oh, almost certainly.
BC, not just from
Well, we don't know when the originals were written. We just know that they're...
closer to Jacob's time?
Yeah, but we just don't know when. That's what I'm trying to say.
Why do you think they all disappeared?
Oh, probably because they were not written on tablets.
They had written language back then, right?
On clay tablets.
Okay,
and they didn't write them on clay tablets because the narratives didn't exist then. If they had these narratives written on clay tablets, we would have found them.
So what were they written on?
They were written on typically animal hide,
which disintegrates.
Yeah, it just it goes back to the ground. It goes back to Mother Earth. There,
After how long?
I don't know.
Not
that long.
Yeah.
I mean, have you seen an animal hide in the wilderness get eaten up? Doesn't take too long. So that being said, if they're not committing things into writing, during the days of the clay tablet cuneiform, they waited all the way into the era of like vellum, which is like the animal hide substrate. That means there's still like there's like an 800-year period where they just didn't write anything down. It's possible that this had been an oral tradition for 1,000 years before they got around to writing it.
I mean, over 1,000, right?
Yeah.
Like 1,300 or something?
Well, no, they had parchment before then. They had animal skins to write on before then.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that the introduction of writing on like animal skins as opposed to clay pottery or clay, that came much later.
Oh, okay.
I know the cat came to visit.
Isn't that so funny because you put up the gate and
Oh, the cat got over the gate?
Yeah.
That's impressive. I don't even know how he did it.
Funny. All right, let's go on.
Yeah, I mean, the interruption by the cat there.
Yeah, or we'll be here all night.
Yeah, so let's read verses 3 and 4.
All right.
This is the blessing for Reuben.
Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Unstable as water, you shall not...
Nice. You're talking to the microphone.
You want me to repeat it?
No, go ahead.
All right. Unstable as water, you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed. Then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. He went up to my couch.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Again, this is Hebrew poetry. If you read it in Hebrew, you would see what they're doing, but we have it in English.
This is poetry?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
All right. So, I'm pretty sure this whole... Oh, is she cute? He cute.
Yeah. Gotta focus.
I'm pretty sure...
I know you love cats.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure this whole time Joseph and Benjamin have been his strength. So, what's interesting is if we take the Bible with Genesis at face value, which is to say that if one story is true, all stories are true. Isn't it interesting that Reuben is getting punished for sleeping with Jacob's concubine? And I bet there's never any mention of that Shechem massacre. It makes me wonder why the narrator would include such unfair punishments, unless we are to presume that the narrator thought the massacre was justified.
Yeah, so... as far as I can tell, Reuben is called the strength or his strength because it's his firstborn. And typically, your firstborn is kind of your right-hand man.
Except he didn't, right?
Well, he probably was. I mean, beside the fact that he slept with the concubine,
Do you think he was doing that to usurp the power or no? Because I know we mentioned that before.
Yeah, it seemed like that's the most likely candidate. Is that
possibly just... she was hot.
That's the other thing. It could just be that he thought the concubine was a hottie toddy.
Yeah.
He couldn't hold himself back. He had to get some action.
Did you say hottie thoughty?
Hottie toddy.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean she could have been a thought. I mean,
Okay.
For those that are over 50, you have to Google the term thought. So, anyways, the fact of the matter is, as you said, I think the most likely scenario why he slept with the concubine was to take the power. Oh, which actually is really interesting because remember in the curse, we call it blessing, but it's really a curse that he utters.
Right.
It says, "You are my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, and the excellency and dignity, and the excellency of power." This is really kind of saying, like, "Hey, you were my source of strength and power." And then he says, "But you defiled your father's bed." It's almost like he's saying, "You tried to rob me of my strength and my power."
I mean, honestly, if Reuben was just enamored by her, I guess I would assume Jacob wouldn't be as upset, right?
Right. And I think this lends credence. The curse lends credence to the idea that he might have been sleeping with the concubine in order to gain level up in the clan, if that makes sense. Just like we saw Absalom sleep with his father's concubines on the roof, right?
And then later on, David, right?
No, that was David's wives.
Later on, David will sleep with Solomon's wife, Saul's.
Well,
something.
Well, that's after he passes away. You're right. That's in the when Nathan curses David for taking Bathsheba. He indicates that God gave Saul's wives to David, which would happen in kingly succession. Your harem would get passed from one king to another because remember, women don't have rights.
They wouldn't just all get fired.
You wouldn't think so. I mean, they got to go somewhere. Someone's got to take care of them. So why not give them to the next guy now that they're all defiled?
Yeah, sounds awful.
There's some really strange things happening there.
Yeah.
Anyways, the long and short of it is, I think you're right. But to your second point, when they bombarded Shechem, Simeon and Levi, they're going to get some comeuppance that comes in the next couple verses.
Oh, that's good.
Don't worry about them; they're going to get theirs.
You know, it's funny. I read this, but I don't remember it, so it's all a surprise to me. But I'm also, reading it as though it's a surprise.
Right.
That made sense. All right. 5 through 7.
Yeah, let's do 5 through 7.
Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Do you think that they were twins?
So,
I mean, they just seem so similar, don't they?
I don't believe they were twins. I mean, do you remember any twins in the birth narratives?
No, I'm just saying.
I don't believe so.
It seems like they're so similar,
They get lumped together.
Right, yeah.
Which is interesting here too, because every individual in this chapter is individually either blessed or cursed. Except for Simeon and Levi. Simeon and Levi get lumped together for some reason, right? They're treated as a couple or a pair.
Yeah.
Which is odd, right? You think they would separately get, whatever was coming to them.
Yeah.
But now remember, the narrative where they attacked Shechem, okay? That was written by the Yahwist, by the southern source, who didn't like the city of Shechem, which was the primary city in the north. Right? Now, interesting here, they're getting a curse for that, which I think lends credence to this part of the narrative, at least being from the Yahwist, because they're in step with this idea. Well, then again, I take my words back. Well, if they're getting punished for what they did, I don't know. I've got a lot of mixed feelings as to where these narratives developed. I really don't know anymore.
I know we mentioned that after Shechem was annihilated, it came back, right?
Yeah.
So
that's another problem.
It's possible that the massacre never happened.
It is possible the massacre actually never happened, or it happened in a different sequence. It's really hard to
Or maybe
know.
it wasn't nearly as bad.
Right, or exactly, maybe it was exaggerated. But it's weird that only certain parts of the text, some parts seem to be totally cool with Shechem, and some parts are like, well, Shechem's they need to die.
Mm-hmm. I guess I'd also note it's interesting that Levi would get punished so severely, considering the priests who wrote this were Levites.
Right, isn't that interesting? Because if we assume that part of this was edited, written, or whatever, compiled by Levites, it'd be odd that Levi would be included in like this curse.
What is up with that? Why would they let it happen then?
Well, I've got some theories, because remember, the Levitical priests did not get inheritance of land. Remember?
Right.
So I'm curious if the association of Simeon and Levi, because the way it works out, Simeon gets an inheritance of land. It's nothing special, but he gets land. Okay. Levi does not. So I'm curious if Levi gets lumped in with Simeon, and that is part of the explanation for why they don't get a tribal allotment.
So Jacob gives land to all of his sons except for Levi. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's what I'm saying here. He doesn't actually say that Levi is going to get anything here, but he does say, I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And that's exactly what happens to the Levites. The Levites are scattered throughout Israel. The priests initially are allowed to live in multiple cities throughout Israel. And they didn't start to conglomerate till later. So it's, to me, when I read this, it's almost trying to give the explanation, other than the fact that they are priests. It's like another piece of the backstory as to why they didn't get a tribal allotment. You know what I mean?
I get it. Yeah, they're trying to make the pieces fit.
Right. Now, what's interesting, though, is if this is true, if they're going to be scattered because of their crime,
right? Yeah,
that kind of counteracts the narrative that you get in the book of Exodus. So I think in Exodus 18 is when the priests are selected. I could be wrong, but I think it's Exodus 18. It is when the priests get selected. And the general idea is, well, the priests don't get a tribal allotment. Because their inheritance is the Lord, and they're meant to serve as priests throughout Israel, and so they need to be scattered throughout Israel to perform their duties. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So they've got to be everywhere.
Well, yeah. Well, you're making it sound like it's a punishment, but I don't think being a priest would be a punishment, right?
That's what I'm saying. In the Exodus narrative, the Levitical priesthood is not a punishment. It seems to be, if you will, maybe even a blessing. But here in Genesis, it almost seems like the Levites are cursed to be scattered.
Yeah, so it must be written by somebody who didn't like the Levites.
Right. The problem is, I don't understand how Simeon would fit into this. How does Simeon fit into being scattered? Because if you look at the map of the 12 tribes, Simeon does get land, but they don't get a great land. They're kind of locked into Judah. So if you look at Judah on the map, Simeon has like an encampment within Judah.
Was this all Jacob's land?
What do you mean?
And then he partitioned it out to his sons?
No, Jacob didn't have any land.
Oh, I don't know.
This is all after the Exodus. This doesn't happen until hundreds of years later.
Oh.
So none of this land
okay.
has been divvied up.
All right.
They're going to spend 400-something years in Exodus. I mean, in Egypt, and then they're going to leave Egypt, and they're going to have a conquest of the land.
So basically, none of these blessings or prophecies or whatever mean anything, right?
What I'm saying is,
not to them at least, right?
Exactly. So these prophecies, right? They don't mean anything to the children. They have no idea what they're being told at all, right?
Yeah.
So it's wild because Jacob's like saying all these things, and they're like, "I'm sorry, what? What are you talking about?"
Well, that's ridiculous. Then that would never be real.
It seems implausible
It does seem
unless
implausible.
you believe that these are just straight prophecies. Or I think it's personally, I just think it's more likely that these were written hundreds of years after the fact as an explanation
Right.
for why some of the tribes of Israel got some things over another thing.
I mean,
Like,
is it possible that the sons would have been like, "Yo, what are you talking about? And what's my real blessing?" You know, or is that just not written somewhere? You know,
you would think there'd be many, many clarifying questions,
right?
right?
Yeah.
But to me, like we've seen so many times in Genesis, it seems to be this narrative seems to be an explanation for
Yeah.
why things are the way they are at the time of writing. And the time of writing, as far as I can tell, seems to be shortly after the divided monarchy. So shortly after King Solomon had his kingdom divided. So maybe in the middle, the late 10th century, early 9th century BCE. That's where I think it's actually written. Now, we don't have documents that go that far back, but I think there's evidence internally to suggest that these documents originated very close to the time of King Jeroboam and Rehoboam.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can as we read through it, it'll kind of become a little bit more obvious how we can pinpoint where the narratives, or at least part of it, could have stemmed from.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll have to do that.
Because the tribe of Dan becomes really instrumental in dating this. We'll explain later when we get there.
What's that in Exodus?
The tribe of Dan?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
I don't know. When is he relevant?
Well, he's always relevant, but in the book of Judges,
Oh,
there's a
okay.
narrative.
It's gonna be forever.
We're not going to read Judges.
Oh, we are?
No, we're not. What I'm saying is, in the book of Judges, the tribe of Dan is moved,
Yeah.
and it seems to be an ancient relic in this particular section of Genesis, where they may not know yet. It seems like they're writing in a time period in which the people of Dan are still primarily located in the south.
Okay.
And I think honestly, even though the book of Judges would lead you to believe otherwise, I think the reapportionment of Dan from the south to the north, I think that happened over a long period of time. I don't think everybody just got up and moved.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of them started moving, and it probably took hundreds of years for them to actually eventually relocate. And when we read Genesis 49, it seems to be indicating that the people of Dan, like most of them, are probably still in the south. So that's why I think that we can date a lot of this pretty far back, because if this was written at a time where all the Danites had already migrated north,
Yeah.
we would expect to have a description of Dan that is in the north. But the description of Dan that we get matches the Dan that we get from the south. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Anyways, we'll get to Dan later. Let's read verses 8 through 12, because this is really interesting.
All right. Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hands shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion who shall rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes. And to him shall be the obedience of the people, binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. That made sense. Hold on and save some blessings for your other sons, right? I mean, look at that. That's like, oh,
A lot.
It's pretty obvious the agenda the author had, though. I think that's obvious,
Right. Yeah. Either Jacob is like super prophetic, or the southern editors are explaining why Judah is so awesome.
Yeah, which means it had to have been written around that time when Judah was the bee's knees, right?
Right. Well, I think it's actually written shortly after Judah and the northern tribe split.
Okay.
And we'll get to that. There's a section in here that very clearly indicates, I think it really points to a division between the north and the south. In fact, we're actually kind of touching on it already. Maybe now would be a good time to mention it, because the narrative here seems to be suggesting that it says the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes.
Okay.
So this is really interesting. So the first thing is saying, well, the succession of kings will be in Judah. And that's where the kings come from. The Judean kings. They're all from Judah. Well, except for King Saul. King Saul, I believe, was a Benjaminite. But after that, you have David, and then all the good kings are all Judean kings. So it says the scepter will not depart, and that's a promise that is given to King David, and then eventually is also given to Solomon, and it also appears in the book of Numbers as a promise. But it also says, nor a lawgiver from between his feet. You could take this to mean multiple things, but I think the most likely interpretation is saying that the scepter will not depart from your clan, nor a lawgiver, meaning another king, from between your feet, which typically means your reproductive organs. He's saying that the crown, the scepter, the kingship will not depart from your lineage, is what he's saying, from Judah.
Between your feet.
Until what, though? It says until Shiloh comes.
Yeah, I don't know what that.
I know, all right? That's where it gets really interesting. All right, so in order to really get into what's happening with Shiloh, there's a little bit of confusion. The translations don't all translate it the same. So, for example, in some translations, it'll say until tribute comes to him, which is a fair translation of the Hebrew there. I didn't write it down in the notes, so I already forget what's in the Hebrew. But I think Nahum Sarna, he's a Hebrew scholar, and others have posited that it should be a reference to the northern shrine of Shiloh. The northern shrine in Shiloh was one of the most popular and sacred shrines of the north. So Shiloh is a town in the north, and it's one of the most famous places for people to go and to worship. But it's more important than that. When the monarchy is divided after King Solomon, it's announced by a prophet named Ahijah of Shiloh. He's from Shiloh. So there's a prophet from Shiloh who announces that God is breaking off 10 tribes from Solomon and giving them their own kingdom. And you'll never guess what else. Shiloh is in the most famous of the northern tribes from Ephraim. Remember, Ephraim got the primary blessing from Jacob in the previous chapter. So it seems to be suggesting that the scepter, the kingship, will not depart from the tribe of Judah until the monarchy is divided. That division happens by a prophet from Shiloh, and it seems to be indicated in the text. And that's why I'm thinking that this chapter probably had to have been narrated, written down, whatever, after the monarchy split apart.
Yep. Because they wrote about it splitting apart.
Right.
And obviously, we're assuming this wasn't an actual prophecy.
I'm not assuming it is. I think there are some straight prophecies, obviously, in the Bible, but I think this is political narrative. That's what I think. You know. Right. But it's interesting that the narrative doesn't really say anything negative about the split between the North and the South. You would think if they're referencing the split between the North and the South, they would have had something to say about the wicked, tribes of the North or something, right? But anyway, that's all I had to say about that. That's what I think is happening, and that's how I think we can date this text. But you probably had some other things to say before I move on and say anything else.
Did I? Where are we at? Is it here?
I think so.
All right. Your father's children will bow down before you. I assume he means himself, Jacob. But isn't this close to the dream Joseph shared with his other brothers? I think Jacob knew about his dream. So why cause all this animosity between his brothers again?
Right. Isn't that interesting? Now, the dream previously that all the brothers would bow down to Joseph is now being applied to the Judeans.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird? You would think that, I don't know, you would think that Joseph wouldn't, something so silly wouldn't leave his mouth, knowing what it did last time,
Right.
the division that it caused. But if this is a prophecy for the distant future, I guess maybe they don't care. Like, well, it's not going to affect me, you know.
I think it's obvious that the writers were like, "Oh, that's a good line. Let me include it." Right?
Yeah, I think so.
Because I mean, to them, it's like it really ties it together.
I think so.
But to us, it's like that's obviously stupid.
I think so.
I mean,
yeah.
I know Jacob was a terrible father, but still,
Right.
Even he's not an idiot, right?
Well, the other thing too, and again, that whole sentence was weird in the third person. Your father's children will bow down before you. What? But anyways, the other thing too is up to this point, Judah hasn't done anything to deserve this blessing.
Right.
You see that, right?
Yeah, he was the one that slept with his daughter-in-law, right?
Yeah, Judah slept with Tamar.
Yeah, so I mean, he hasn't really shown himself to be that great yet.
The only thing he's done so far was stand up
Right.
for his brother.
I mean, he didn't stand up that much, but
he just said, "Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites," as opposed to
right, yeah,
as opposed to kill him.
I mean, that's good, but
right. And then he did speak up in the presence of Joseph for his brother Benjamin. That's about it, right? Up till now, Judah has not done anything to deserve any praise or blessings, but he gets a really outsized blessing.
Well,
here.
and I don't even, I know we talked about this, but I think we agreed that probably Judah did not actually speak up for Benjamin, right?
I don't know.
It's just somebody had to, and they're like, well, let's do it to Judah because he's already
it's
a bunch of good stuff.
It's possible that's
what I thought. Anyhow.
Again, it's just a plot narrative to prop up Judah. Yeah, for sure. We've seen quite a few of those.
So there's be no reason for anybody to write something like this unless they were writing from the future where it had already happened, huh?
Yeah, and they were looking to justify the way things are, the way that they are. Which reminds me, so Reuben gets a curse because he sleeps with his father's concubine, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Think about all the people so far in Genesis that are cursed. You've got the Canaanites. What were they cursed for?
Existing.
Well, they were cursed because they appear to be the offspring of Ham.
Oh, okay.
And his mother,
right.
Depending on your interpretation of the passage. So they're then who else? You've got a curse, theoretically. Not really a curse, but you've got two cursed people groups, the Ammonites and the Moabites, who came from the incestuous union between Lot and his two daughters.
Oh.
Right? And there's one more, there's a third, and I apologize because I've forgotten it. But isn't it strange that so many people who receive some kind of a curse in Genesis, they always seem to justify it? Well, Sodom and Gomorrah were committing sexual sins too. And the men of Gibeah, that's in the book of Judges though. But in this historical narrative, it seems like all these cursed people groups, they keep getting tied back to sexual sins.
Is that right?
It's a weird trend that all the people God curses just happen to come from illegitimate unions.
Okay. Oh.
It's almost like the God of the Torah is like really obsessed with like purity in bed. You know what I mean?
I mean, sort of. I mean, there's concubines and all that, so
Well, concubines are perfectly legit.
I know. I'm just saying it's hypocritical.
The problem is if you sleep
my
with someone
opinion.
else's concubine, that's the problem,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And this shows up elsewhere, like in I think Deuteronomy 23 says that anybody born of an illicit union will not be allowed into the assembly of the Lord, even into the 10th generation.
Where's that at?
Deuteronomy 32. I mean,
Yeah.
23.
They were really big into that.
Yeah. So like it's just weird that there's like this concerted effort to make sure all the cursed people in history are from some illicit sexual union. Just like the Canaanites were the illicit sexual union of the angels and the women, remember?
Yeah.
A bunch of the Nephilim and the Rephaim seemed to be the result of an illicit sexual union between angels and mankind. And so again, all these cursed people, like, well, their forefathers, they diddled the wrong people, and they effed around and found out, literally, right? It's just weird. It's a weird trend, Anyways, that's about enough of that. Let's move on.
I guess it just means the people that were writing it were really big into purity or something, right?
Or prudes, man.
Yeah.
Or maybe they really thought that sexual sins were like the worst of the sins. Is there a time period in which sexual sins were in fact terrible, terrible, terrible sins? The only time period I can think of is the time period of Ezra the scribe. Ezra the scribe, during that time period, he went like scorched earth on purity within the marriage bed. Like even people who are married to foreigners, he made them get rid of their wives. The wives and the children literally said, "Get out of here, divorce them, get them out."
Sounds like and this was a prophet.
Well, he was like a scribe.
Because he had a book, right?
Or a priest. There's a book attributed to him. Usually gets read with Nehemiah. It talks about what happened after they returned from the Babylonian exile.
Sounds like a terrible person.
Yeah, Ezra's a maniac. But that's the only time in history I can really think of where like sexual purity and marriage purity was like the thing. Like there was just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You're going to conform or you're going to get kicked out of the community.
Right.
So anyways, let's read on.
All right. Let's see. Are we at 13 then?
Yeah.
We had more to say.
Well, yeah. Oh, there is more. We should talk about the donkeys.
All right. I think where's that at?
It's like verse 11 and 12. You might just read verse 11 and 12 again.
All right. All right, let's see. Binding his donkey to the vine and his donkey's coat to the choice vine, he washed his garments in wine and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine and his teeth whiter than milk. That another poem?
You're so enthusiastic when you read that.
I don't know what's going on. They're talking about making wine, I guess.
Yeah, so what's happening here is it's a picture of blessings.
Okay.
Because Judah didn't already get enough blessings.
Right.
They're basically saying that the grapevines are going to be so voluminous, they're going to be so stout and productive that you can even tether your donkey to them, even the king's donkey, and they won't be destroyed. Because typically if you tethered your donkey to like a grapevine, which is really weak, it would destroy the grapevine, and it would also probably eat a whole bunch of the produce as well.
And so verse 12 is saying that Judah will be blessed with like minty fresh breath and no cavities.
No.
Probably got that one wrong.
White teeth is a picture of vitality.
Okay. White teeth.
Yeah. So in the ancient world, somebody with strong white teeth was somebody who was healthy and strong, in good health, right? It's one of the reasons why, the old saying, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. No, because that's how you tell if a horse is old or has problems, right? So the teeth was a pretty good indicator of somebody's health.
Oh, I did not know that.
So Judah is being personified as a human being here, which is irony of ironies, since at the time this is being spoken, Judah literally is a person. So he's literally personifying the nation of Judah in the future as a person.
The person.
Which just, the mental gymnastics going on there is wild.
Yeah. That's silly. They're silly.
Anyways.
So binding his donkey to the vine. So he binds it to a regular vine. But then the donkey has a horse that the donkey rides, I guess. And that one's...
So, it says binding his donkey to the vine and his donkey's colt, which is like a foal, a smaller donkey, a younger donkey, a child donkey, to the choice vine.
Oh, is colt? That doesn't mean horse?
No.
Okay. So it's like a little baby donkey?
Yeah, that would be anachronistic. At this time period, horses had not been in the land of Canaan whatsoever at all.
Does colt mean horse?
No.
So it's not anachronistic.
I'm saying if it meant horse, it would be anachronistic, yeah.
Okay. So what does this mean again? What's so good to bind a tiny donkey to a choice vine?
That's what I'm saying is, what he's saying is the grapevines, which is typically, especially in Judea, was one of the main crops.
Okay.
The harvest, the grapevines are going to be so enormous and overflowing and sturdy. It's going to be such a sturdy crop that you can even tie your donkey to it, which normally you wouldn't do it because it would destroy your crops.
Okay.
Right? So it's basically a symbolic idea of how blessed they're going to be.
And the donkey's colt to the choice vine? That means that they'll have a lot of donkey babies?
No.
Okay.
Just Hebrew parallelism. Don't worry about it.
All right. Do you think that when they were giving this prophecy out, everybody's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense?
They definitely didn't know what was happening.
Okay.
If these words left Jacob's lips,
yeah,
no way any of these children had a clue what he was talking about. They were like, well, the old man's close to death.
Yeah.
Certainly they're not going to pass it down to their children. Like, well, when your father, when your great grandfather was on a deathbed, he gave us a prophecy. That seems unlikely to me.
Yeah.
If these words are being spoken, it seems more likely that the children are like, well, the old man's lost his mind. Just smile and nod. He'll be gone soon.
Yeah.
We won't get anything because we're all in Egypt now.
Okay. Well, actually, yeah, that's true, right?
Yeah. They're all in Egypt, remember?
Yeah. Okay.
All right, verse 13.
Zebulun shall dwell by the haven of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall adjoin Sidon. See, Zebulun, your father didn't forget about you. It's a pretty specific prophecy, though. I mean, we have to assume God gave Jacob these revelations, right? A haven for ships. I mean, just out of the blue,
Yeah, that's the problem.
That's weird, right?
So the interesting thing here is Zebulun gets described as in terms of tribal allotment. So Zebulun will dwell by the haven of the sea. Oh, that's weird. So now Jacob is saying, well, this is where your tribal allotment is going to be. Oh. It's going to border Sidon. Isn't that interesting that Jacob is so prophetic here? He knows where the tribe of Zebulun is going to dwell.
That's weird, yeah.
Isn't that weird? The other thing, though, is it's not perfectly accurate. So the whole congregation of Israel got their tribal allotments, and there's a couple things here. We've already touched on it once, right? Jacob is basically prophesying where some of these tribes are going to get their land, right? Right. So you would think that when they're in the land and they're dividing up the land, they would just say, well, our forefather Jacob said that Zebulun would get their land here. right? Don't you think that's how they would divide the land up?
Sure.
If this is true history,
I mean, okay, if it's true,
and
yeah.
it's truly prophetic,
Right.
and this was passed down through oral or written tradition,
Yeah.
then when they divided up the land, they would have said, okay, well, here is at least some of the tribal divisions that Jacob gave us and where they're supposed to be. So let's draw those in first.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Problem is that's not the way it happened. So in the book of Joshua, chapter 18, you get the tribal allotments. It says, when the whole congregation of the Israelites assembled at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there, the land lay subdued before them. So notice here, the earliest tent of meeting, the earliest religious site is in Shiloh in the book of Joshua. It says, there remained among the Israelites 7 tribes whose inheritance had not been apportioned. So Joshua said to the Israelites, how long will you be slack about going in and taking possession of the land that the Lord your God of your ancestors has given you? Provide 3 men from each tribe, and I will send them out, that they may begin to go throughout the land, writing a description of it with a view of their inheritances. Then come back to me. They will divide the land into 7 portions, Judah continuing in its territory on the south, and the house of Joseph in their territory on the north. You will write a description of the land in 7 divisions and bring the description before me, and I will cast lots for you before the Lord your God. So they divide up the remaining land, including the land of Zebulun, literally by casting lots. Wild guess that Zebulun's land would be in the north, roughly where Jacob said it would be.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where we have one. I got one more thing to say about that, because there's a problem.
Okay.
And if you look at the map, you'll notice that whose land is north by the sea? Is it Zebulun?
North by the sea. Manasseh?
It's Asher.
That was good. I'm even looking at the map.
Right?
I'm good.
That's right. So top left, what is the tribe that butts up against the city of Sidon, as it said in the narrative? It's not Zebulun.
Look, it's
sea,
Asher.
Asher.
Sea of Galilee?
Right.
Sea.
But you've missed the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean Sea, the whole left side of the map.
It's a little bigger, isn't it?
Anyways, the long and short of it is, Zebulun is landlocked. They're not touching the Sea of Galilee, and they're not touching the Mediterranean Sea.
Hey, that's weird.
And they're definitely not touching the land of Sidon in the north, as it was said in the prophecy.
But not even by the Sea of Galilee.
Right.
Well, then what happened?
Now, it is true that they're sandwiched between 2 seas. There's that. But they're definitely not as far north.
I'm sure a lot of them are sandwiched between 2 seas, right?
Yeah, but they're definitely not as far north as what you would think.
Well, so what happened?
Well, I don't know. It just says Zebulun will dwell by the haven of the sea, and he will become a haven for ships, which obviously isn't going to happen if you're landlocked.
Right.
It says, and his border will adjoin Sidon, which obviously isn't happening because the border that joins with Sidon is not Zebulun, it's Asher.
Okay, well, so either Jacob, his prophecy was wrong, but we don't believe he was prophesying, so it doesn't matter. So it means the people that wrote this were wrong. Now, why were they wrong? I mean, were they right? They were writing this, and they thought that's what was going to happen, or that's what happened, but then it didn't.
Well, see, there's multiple. There's a lot of different solutions that scholars offer. And most of them go back to the idea that there must have been an ancient tradition that said that the tribe was located further north where Asher was, and another tradition where it wasn't located there, and they just got their wires crossed. But to be sure, it's also quite possible that the land of Zebulun and the land of Asher could have literally actually just been mixed, right? It's possible in real life, in actual history, that Zebulun and Asher weren't clear-cut territories like the narrative would make you think. It's possible that the two people groups literally just shared the same location. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or it's possible that the book of Judges is wrong and the book of Genesis is right. We don't really know because we don't have historical evidence telling us precisely where these tribes were located.
Hey, that land where the 12 tribes were, how big is that?
Big,
It's big.
like the size of a U.S. state, like Ohio, maybe.
Ohio.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not that big, right?
The Palestine's pretty small. Palestine would fit inside of the state of Ohio.
Okay.
So we're talking about a tribal allotment that I don't know could be the size of like Cleveland and Akron or
So
something.
we're talking about Israel plus Palestine, the current ones.
What?
That was the land.
Huh? Israel is Palestine.
I mean, now.
Yeah.
So Israel and Palestine, as they are now, make up the 12 tribes land. Is that what you're saying?
For the most part, yeah.
Okay.
A little more nuanced than that, but
Right.
yeah.
That's why Israel thinks Palestine is their land.
Well, Israel thinks that it's their land because of the biblical narrative.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
But it was a Canaanite's land before them.
Well, but I mean, they think they have some sort of right of God.
Yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. Because it was some of their tribe brothers.
That's why they're called Zionists, because they believe in the restoration of Zion.
Oh, I thought Zion just
the kingdom of God.
I thought Zion meant heaven.
No.
It does.
Yeah.
Pretty close.
It's a euphemism for the heavenly kingdom when it comes to the earth. But Zion is literally referring to Mount Zion inside of the territory of Jerusalem in the tribe of Judah.
Oh. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, whatever. Let's go.
That's okay.
Yeah, I don't know anything.
We're learning.
Yeah, I guess so. Slowly. Honestly, to know everything you know about Genesis, we'd have to do this whole thing again another 3 or 4 times.
That's okay. I mean,
yeah,
I'm learning as well as we're going.
All right. Well, maybe we'll hit Exodus in the next 4 or 5 years.
I mean, next 2 weeks.
No, we're going to Genesis again 3 or 4 times is what I said.
I don't think we should do that. I think once was good.
We'll see. All right. Are we on 14?
14 and 15.
Issachar is a strong donkey lying down between 2 burdens. He saw that rest was good and that the land was pleasant. He bowed his shoulder to bear a burden and became a band of slaves. Man, somebody didn't like Issachar, huh? I bet, I bet Jacob, even Jacob was like, who is this guy? I guess we can't all be Joseph or Judah. But I'm looking at this now and I'm wondering if that means that Issachar, the land, was between 2 other pieces of land and they were full of not nice people.
Yeah, so
let me see that map, huh?
Well, the map is of the tribal allotments.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about,
right?
So yeah, okay, so Issachar is right there.
Yeah, Issachar's got 4 neighbors.
Okay, so were 2 of them not nice?
Well, no, they're all brothers, remember?
Yeah, but they might have not liked each other.
No, they're all part of the same kingdom.
Okay, well then, how come 2 of them are burdens?
I'll show. I got it. Don't worry, I got notes.
All right,
I got you. Okay, so first of all, before we get into that, remember up till now, of course, Issachar doesn't really have a role to play.
Mm-hmm.
Really weird that he's getting cursed. This is definitely a curse, right? It says he's going to become a band of slaves.
Oh yeah, right.
It's a really strange prediction for the future.
Yeah, would that suck if you were listening to your father right then and there?
Dude, your dad's on his deathbed giving out blessings, but like all of them are curses, basically.
Yeah.
Like half of them are curses. And Zebulun, or Issachar, who's like hasn't done anything.
Right.
It's just like, yeah, you're going to be slaves. It's so weird.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, there's a lot happening because Issachar, if you keep reading in the biblical narrative, was like largely unsuccessful in defeating the Canaanites. Remember when they came into the land in the book of Judges? It says that the house of Joseph and the house of Judah were successful in driving out the inhabitants of the land.
Okay.
Odd that the only two tribes that were successful in doing so are the two tribes that we hear glowingly about
Yeah.
in the book of Genesis. All the other tribes are listed in Judges chapter 1 as failing
Is that right?
to drive out the
It was
inhabitants.
Joseph and Judah.
There were the only two that succeeded, and Issachar, in the list of Israelites as they were driving out the tribes and how successful they were or were not, Issachar is not even mentioned. All the other tribes are mentioned. Issachar is completely ignored. Ignored. And I assume it's because they didn't even attempt to conquest of the land. And this seems to be confirmed if you read the rest of the text. The rest of the text kind of describes Issachar as being subdued by the Canaanites who already lived there.
So like, okay.
And largely becoming servants or a servant class or tributaries of the local Canaanites as opposed to driving them out.
Maybe they just intermarried and called it a day.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like, it doesn't sound like they were actually slaves, right? Or, you know what I mean?
Well, that's if you're a tributary, that means that you have to pay tribute to the neighboring people groups, right? So, for example, you could be given, okay, if you were from Lebanon, Babylon might say, as tribute, you have to pay us 40,000 cedar trees a month or something, right? And so all the people who lived in the land of the cedar trees, most of the men would be conscripted into cutting down trees because you got to meet your quota, right? So there's a name for this type of forced labor. I think it's a korvah labor in Hebrew. And it just refers to forcing another people group into paying a really heavy tribute, a tribute that is so heavy that the nation group itself kind of becomes a slave to another nation group. That makes sense.
Why didn't Issachar just, leave? Go anywhere else?
Where are you going to go? He's landlocked.
Well, no, and then go live with one of his brothers or something,
Well, he could have. Maybe some of them did assimilate. They migrated into better territories. Just like here, if the economy in Ohio dies, we could go to Michigan. We can go to Indiana. I'm sure a lot of people did assimilate. A lot of people, rather than fighting the good fight, probably said, forget this. Manasseh looks pretty decent right now. I think I'll go check out Manasseh.
So is the assumption that they lost because they did not have faith in God?
We're not told.
Because, that's usually what it is, right?
The narrative seems to suggest that they just didn't care, that they willingly assimilated into the culture and accepted their fate.
Maybe it's not that they didn't care. They just didn't want to hurt people for no reason.
Possibly. I don't know.
You know what I mean? A lot of this was weird, right? Having to come in and defeat a whole group of people for pretty much no reason. Just because your God said, oh, this land is yours now. Well, maybe the Issacharians were like, not a great justification.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't commit genocide.
Right.
Maybe that's not the thing to do.
And so now they're being punished for it.
Yeah, because remember in the Bible it said you will not intermarry with the Canaanites.
Yeah.
Because they will cause you to worship their gods. And then what happens in the biblical narrative? They worship the Canaanite gods, and God punishes them for it.
Then maybe that's what happened. They were gonna, massacre them, but then they're like, let's just all get together. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just it doesn't mean that they worshipped their gods or anything,
Right, but God literally commanded them to kill all of them. Right?
Do you think that was God or
Deuteronomy 20, I think verse 17 has the prohibition against letting them live. In fact, grab my Bible right there. We'll grab Deuteronomy 20. There's a couple prohibitions in the Bible saying to kill all the Canaanites, but Deuteronomy 20, I think, is pretty clear. Let me grab that. So if you go to Deuteronomy 20, it says, when you draw near to a town to fight against it, offer it terms of peace. If it accepts your terms of peace and surrenders to you, then all the people in it will serve you as forced labor.
Oh.
If it does not submit to you peacefully, but makes war against you, then you will besiege it. And when the Lord your God gives it into your hand, you will put all the males to the sword. You may, however, take as your booty the women, the children, the livestock, and everything else in the town as spoil. You may enjoy the spoil of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given to you. Thus you will treat all of the towns that are very far from you, which are not the towns of the nations here. As for the towns and the peoples the Lord your God is giving to you as an inheritance, meaning the Canaanites, you must not let anything that breathes remain alive. You will utterly annihilate them. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Yeah.
Is that what they're really called?
Perizzites.
Oh.
Not parasites. So the Canaanites that are living in land that were not to be left alive. They were commanded to be utterly annihilated, completely annihilated. Men, women, children, cattle.
I don't want to get into this too much, but do you think it was like, do you personally think it was God who ordered them to, or was there a political reason, or you know what I mean? Why was it included in that?
Well, it's written so many times in the Old Testament that you either have to conclude that the Old Testament is completely false or God hates the Canaanites. The narrative in Genesis only gives us one reason, and the reason is that Ham, the forefather of Canaan, slept with his mother.
Right.
Or number two, that the sins of the Amorites were so much that they needed to be dealt with. The book of Leviticus says that the people living in Canaan had defiled the land so much so that the land was now going to be spitting them out. So the rest of the Bible makes it appear that the Canaanites were just evil, wicked people that God needed to cleanse from the land.
They were evil for hundreds of years.
Apparently.
Every single person.
Which is surprising because they were super devout religious people. In fact, God over and over again condemns their religion. You would think that if God simply just appeared to all the Canaanites and said, hey, by the way, I'm the one true God, right, seems likely they would have said, oh, well, this Baal fella, maybe we shouldn't.
Well, to be fair, he doesn't do that nowadays either. So
right. Yeah.
But, they were living pretty close to the Canaanites for a lot of the time, right?
Yeah.
So it's fun. It's funny that they would live so close to them, and yet, they're the worst people in the world, right?
Right.
Because, Jacob was living in Canaanite land, right?
And Abraham. And,
they all were, yeah.
But that, again, demonstrates the problem, because who did Jacob's brother marry? Esau. He married Canaanite women, and it worried his mother to death almost.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's always been a really big prohibition against mixing with the Canaanites. And here, with the tribe of Issachar mingled with the Canaanites and didn't go well. Rather than driving them out, he became slaves to them.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what the underlying political reason for writing that would have been. Do you know what I mean?
Probably because it was a reality. The tribe of Issachar was probably a real tribe in the land, and they probably were subjugated by the non-Israelites living there.
And so the historians had to figure out a reason for that, why that was?
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course, also remember, the 12 tribes were real people. The Canaanites were real people. Some of this is true.
It's hard to know which is true.
I know, but we know for a fact in history that the 12 tribes, in some way, shape, or form, legitimately existed in the land.
Really?
They were legitimately there. We're going to cover some of that as we go. Let's read about Dan.
Okay. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that its rider shall fall backward. I have waited for your salvation, O Lord. I bet if Jacob knew how long his deathbed blessings were going to take, he would have had less children. This guy's like, I'm going to die, but I got to wait 2 weeks just to tell people. I don't know. So right before this moment, I don't think we've heard anything about Dan. I guess he was a good guy since he became a judge. I like how Jacob is like, oh, by the way, he'll be a snake and blah, blah, blah. Probably not what Jacob meant, but sometimes the language translation can be silly.
Right.
He's going to be a snake.
So there's some mixed feelings about what this actually means.
By the way, he'll be a snake.
Right.
It's probably not, yeah.
Okay, so there's I think the traditional interpretation follows that this is kind of hinting at the most famous judge in the book of Judges. Everybody knows him. He had long hair. He saw a prostitute named Delilah.
Jesus?
I'm sorry, what?
Dan?
From the book of Judges?
Yeah, I didn't read Judges.
You don't know who Samson is?
Oh, yeah,
The
Samson.
guy with the long hair?
Oh, yeah, Samson.
Okay, so Samson came from the tribe of Dan, right?
Okay.
It says
Wait,
Dan
Samson was a judge?
Yeah, the book of Judges.
I thought he was just like a strong guy.
No. All the saviors in the book of Judges are referred to as judges.
Oh.
Now we really got to get through the rest of the Bible.
Is it just a title, or did they actually judge people?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
A little bit of both. It basically just means leader, right?
I assume whenever you say judges, I imagine a big old pulpit, and they got that gavel, and they're judging the other people.
No, Moses was a judge.
I mean,
and he set up other judges below him.
Oh.
That's in the book of Exodus. His stepfather, basically comes and sees that Moses is judging all the people, all their cases by himself, and he says, "Why are you doing this all by yourself? Set up some judges underneath of you to do the work for you."
It was his stepfather.
I always forget his name. It starts with a J, but he has actually two names in the Exodus narrative. I forget what his second name is, but his first name starts with a J. And there's probably somebody in the watching this video shouting his name out loud because I can't think of it right now. But it's not Jephthah. It's not Japheth. Might be Jephthah.
Okay.
I don't know. It's not. You can chat GTP it real quick.
I don't want to, but...
Anyways, the judges are just leaders, right? And the leader of the people is typically the one who has to hear, and like arbitrate between people's disagreements.
Boy, they should have just got to arbitrators then, not judges.
That's what they were. So anyways, I think what a lot of commentators see here is saying that somebody is going to come from the tribe of Dan, one of the most famous judges ever, is not named, but he also says that Dan is going to be a serpent by the way. Typically that is referring to a popular trade route or a popular travel route.
Okay.
Or it could be referring to a popular sea route. Now, as it turns out, Dan is by a popular sea route and a popular travel route.
Oh.
There's a travel route that goes through Dan and then through Philistia to get to Egypt. And it's also true that on this path to get from Dan to Egypt, there would have been like bandits waiting to attack you quite often.
Okay.
So it's possible that they're referring to that Dan is going to be a viper along the path that bites at horses' heels so that its riders falls backwards.
Go ahead.
The problem with this, it doesn't make any sense of the last line where it says, "I have waited for your salvation, O Lord."
No.
And it also poses an issue in that horses at this time period didn't exist. How did Jacob know about horses? Horses really were only used in Egypt, and even at this time period, they were very sparsely used in Egypt. Now, if we assume that Jacob's prophesying about the future in Canaan, it could be that he's actually prophesying about the later position of Dan. Now follow me. So if he's prophesying about Dan while they're still located just north of Philistia, where Samson came from, then that would match the idea that this was written at an early date where Dan hadn't fully migrated yet. But if we assume that at this point Dan had migrated all the way north, well, the greatest enemy of all of Israel infiltrated through the tribe of Dan, or at least partially through the tribe of Dan, to get into the land. And that was Assyria and Babylon. And buddy, did they have horses? And as they came through the land, I'm sure that Dan, probably had troops and put up a fight. That being said, most commentators opt for the first option,
Okay.
which is that this is referring to the original ancestral allotment of Dan next to Philistia, which is where the Philistines came from, which is Israel's greatest enemy before the time and during the time of King David.
I don't understand any of that, but that's okay, right?
It's okay. Let's read verse 19.
So, for verse 18, so I assume you already told me this, I'm not sure, but what was going on? Was Dan not a Christian and Jacob was hoping that one day he would see the light, or you know what I mean?
Well, obviously none of them are Christians.
Well, you know exactly what I mean.
I don't know what you mean.
Like a Jewish Christian or whatever.
You mean a Jew?
Yeah.
Think Dan wasn't a Jew?
Well, look, it says, I have waited for your salvation, O Lord.
Yeah, you want to know what the last verse means.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, that ties in with the second option, which is that it's referring to the invasion of the Babylonians.
Okay.
If this was written during the Babylonian exile, which is pretty late, okay? So if this was written during the Babylonian exile, then it's possible that this is referring to the invasion from the north, and then the northern tribes going into exile who have not received salvation yet. Because remember, tribe in all the northern territories, when Assyria comes through, Assyria exiles all the northern tribes, and they never get restored. But there is a partial restoration after the Babylonian exile, which came after the Assyrian exile. So it's possible it's referring to one of the two exiles. If it's referring to the Assyrian exile, it's just saying that they're waiting for salvation because it's never come yet. If it's referring to the Babylonian exile, it might be written while they were literally in exile and awaiting for salvation.
Okay. Oh.
Right. But if it's referring to the Assyrian exile, that works too.
Okay, so it's got a lot of
options here.
Yeah. That's annoying. All right. 19?
Sure.
Gad, a troop shall tramp upon him, but he shall triumph at last. So it's like, Gad, nobody knows who you are. Either your father is like, here's a blessing that's vague enough to be true.
It's actually really not vague at all.
Oh, but that's great.
I know, right?
Yeah, that's great.
This is actually one of the most specific prophecies of the whole chapter.
Got it wrong.
It's not your fault. Don't worry. Okay, so Gad was endlessly engaged in war because they were situated between the Ammonites and the Moabites. So look at the map again real quick. The tribe of Gad is here, next to the Ammonites, and then the Moabites to the south. Right, so Gad and Reuben were constantly at war with those two territories. And get this. So Gad, because they were always engaged in warfare, they got a really big reputation throughout the Old Testament as being warriors.
Okay.
They're called up to be warriors all the time. You can read Deuteronomy 33, 1 Chronicles chapter 5, and 1 Chronicles chapter 12. And David takes some of his most famous warriors from the tribe of Gad. Right? And so we can read, for example, 1 Chronicles 12:8 says, from the Gadites there went over to David at the stronghold in the wilderness, mighty and experienced warriors, experts with shield and spear, whose faces were like the faces of lions, and who were swift as gazelles on the mountain. Okay, so the Gadites were known as pretty fierce warriors because they were always locked up in war. Here's the thing. We've got extra biblical evidence of this. The Mesha stele was set up in the 8th century by King Mesha of Moab. Remember we just talked about the Moabites they were at war with? And in the Mesha stele, it says, it speaks of the tribe of Gad, and it even speaks of the God of Israel, and it speaks of David in one other spot. So on the Mesha stele put up by King Mesha, it says, and the men of Gad dwelled in the country of Atharoth, from ancient times, and the king of Israel fortified Ataroth. I assaulted the wall and captured it, and I killed the warriors of the city for the well-pleasing of Chemosh and Moab. That's the Moabite deity. And I removed it from the spoil and offered it before Chemosh in Karijath. And I placed therein the men of Saran and the men of Machrath. And Chemosh said to me, "Go and take Nebo against Israel." And I went in the night, and I fought against it from the break of day until noon. And I took it. And I killed in all 7,000 men, women, and maidens, because I devoted them to Ashtar Chemosh. And I took from it the vessels of Yahweh, and I offered them before Chemosh. Wild. So the tribe of Gad at one point was conquered by the Moabites. So much so, and it was in a time period in which the tribe of Gad probably were still worshiping locally as opposed to in Jerusalem. Fascinating. Because, the vessels of Yahweh were taken.
What's that?
Well, those are the instruments of worship that would have been inside of their shrine.
Oh.
Right? And they obviously weren't taken from Jerusalem, where the main capital of Israel was. They didn't defeat all of Israel. They only defeated the tribe of Gad, which means if they took the vessel of Yahweh from Gad, I mean, Gad must have had their own shrine and their own system of worship set up for Yahweh. Really interesting. So we've got historical evidence that the tribe of Gad actually existed, and they actually went to war with Moab. And we've got biblical evidence, too, that the Israelites went to war against Moab. We can read about that elsewhere in the Bible. So, like I said, some parts of the Bible are legitimately historical. It just happens to be that Genesis really doesn't appear to be historical. Genesis seems to be written at a much later date, trying to reconcile the things that are currently the way they are. You know what I mean?
But some of it is historical.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
It'd be nice if, I don't know, there was a way to just know which parts were historical, Well,
you go to school for many years and find out.
And
of course, if you're a traditional Christian, like an inerrantist, you would just say, well, all of it's historical, and wherever the history record disagrees, it's just wrong.
Right.
Which is not.
I don't think I can do that.
Not a very tenable position. But anyways, let's read verses 20 and 21.
Bread from Asher shall be rich, and he shall yield royal dainties.
I don't know what that is.
Naphtali is a deer let loose. He uses beautiful words. The more I read, the more belligerent I get. I just don't care what these guys with no backstory get as blessings. I mean, I bet the only reason they get blessings at all is because the authors are trying to explain some events or something else. Naphtali is an elegant deer? What kind of blessing is that? At least Asher would be a successful baker.
Right. So both, to your point, as a successful baker, right? Both of these tribes were given tribal allotments in the fertile lands of northern Israel, in the plains where you could actually farm and grow crops. And in fact, in ancient Rome, they were known as like the breadbasket of the area. In fact, so much so that the Romans would import grain from this area. So it's a pretty fitting prediction of what becomes of these particular tribes in the land that they live in. So one gets an allotment by the Mediterranean Sea, one gets an allotment by the Sea of Galilee, and then that's where you get, after that, into some confusing things where it says Naphtali is a deer, let him loose. He uses beautiful words. Is weird. The phrase beautiful words for Naphtali, however, has, again, multiple translations because it's not clear what the writer is really saying. And the Hebrew is like, it's not used very often, so we don't really know how to interpret it. Lovely fawns in Hebrew is a unique phrase, and it can be variously translated. The present rendering is based on the word meaning lamb and in multiple Semitic languages. The reference could then be to Naphtali being quick to pay a tribute of sheep to its Canaanite overlords, or to the beauty or the openness or the fruitfulness of its tribal territory. Another possibility is to translate beautiful words, that is, a swift runner from Naphtali brings good tidings of victory, which we read about after Deborah's war against the Canaanites in the book of Judges, right? So after that particular war, good tidings is brought from the tribe of Naphtali. There's a third interpretation that renders it as either goodly bows or a crest of trees. And this compares the tribe to a terebinth tree with spreading branches with a lovely crest. So I say all that to say this. Those were some options for translating the phrase, he uses beautiful words. Fact of the matter is, nobody really knows what is meant there. The Hebrew word, emiri shafer, not really known to most translators what it really means. So
Why not?
your guess is as good as mine.
Why? Is it not
because-
used anywhere else?
Exactly. When you've got words in the text that just aren't used anywhere else, you're like, we've got to make some guesses here. You know?
So this is Hebrew.
Yeah.
We know Hebrew. The language of Hebrew. We know that language, yes?
Most of it.
But what? This is a word nobody's ever seen in any other context?
That's what I'm saying is we have a lot of
Is that possible?
Hebrew words that are scarcely used, right? So how many ancient Hebrew texts do we have where the word shows up? Not that many. You've got the biblical manuscripts, and you've got the Dead Sea Scrolls, and like you've got some early Talmudic writings, like maybe in the Mishnah, but most scholars recognize that Mishnaic Hebrew is a little bit different than biblical Hebrew.
Didn't they write books for people to read or what have you?
Yeah, but how many of those do you think existed or they lasted? Like, how many do you think we actually have?
I don't know. None, apparently.
Not much.
Oh.
Yeah, the body of ancient Hebrew literature is pretty small.
Well, it's crazy that people could learn how to read it then, huh?
Right. Well, luckily we've got the Talmudic writings, because a lot of the writings in the Talmud will tell you, well, this is kind of what it should be, or this is how we interpret it. But you don't always have a reference in the Talmud. There's a lot of strange words that show up in the Bible that the Talmud is completely silent on.
Yeah. So you're saying if the Bible was not written in Hebrew, nobody would bother with learning Hebrew?
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, somebody would learn Hebrew.
Somebody would, but not enough people that there's
obviously not as many
schools for it, right?
So the fact of the matter is, when it says Naphtali is a deer, let him loose, he uses beautiful words. No one's really exactly sure what's being said here.
Okay.
And I certainly don't have an answer.
Well, shoot, you could write like a doctoral thesis on it then.
You could.
Oh, yeah?
I'm sure you could, yeah.
Maybe I will.
People love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, maybe I will.
Picking some like archaic passage that no one really knows what it means and turning a whole dissertation loose on it. Yeah, let's read 22 through 24.
Joseph is a fruitful bough by a well. His branches run over the wall. The archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. But his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. I don't care. Joseph is doing all right for himself. I get that. It's good to see he's still his favorite son. Is any of this a blessing, or is it just like poetic praise?
The jury's a little bit out on what's happening here. It is odd, first of all, that if this is a blessing, which it appears to be, Joseph is a fruitful bough. It's weird because his two sons were given the blessing and the inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
So why is Joseph now getting?
Why is he coming back up? Right.
Why is he coming back up?
Yeah.
But there's also some other really weird things here. For example, a lot of translations don't read the same way, where it says Joseph is a fruitful bough.
Okay.
Bunch of translations read that Joseph is the foal of a wild donkey, the foal of a wild donkey at a spring or a well, one of the wild donkeys at the ridge. And of course, this comes from, in the previous verse, we said there's a word that like doesn't really appear very much. Well, in this particular passage, we've got a word, parat, which doesn't appear anywhere else in the Bible. This is the only place it shows up.
Another one.
Commentators are really unsure as to what's going on here. And part of the problem is the phrase used is Bain Parat, which people don't know what that really means. But Bain is familiar. That means son or child, male offspring. So that's why you might get like the foal, like the child donkey of a wild donkey, if you translate parat as donkey, and parat is very close to the word for donkey, which is para. However, the word for like fruit or fruitfulness it sounds the same. It's para, but it's spelled with a different ending. So the third letter in para and para are both silent. But when you speak it, you don't know the difference. But when you spell it, it is spelled differently, right? And so the question here is, well, which word is the author intending to use? Because the word in the manuscript is parat. But parat isn't a known word.
Oh.
Right?
Okay.
So like, well, if this is not really a known word, or it's some weird mixture, it's some weird conjugation of a known word, what would be the closest thing we would compare it to? It's either para or para. But para or para have two different meanings. So it's either a donkey or it's a fruit basket. It's like, what do you got to pick something, right?
So they could have been calling Joseph is a fruitful donkey?
Well, so the Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew Dictionary favors the translation of a fruitful bough, but I favor the translation of donkey, and let me tell you why.
Okay.
Because in this passage, there's a bunch of language that echoes the Ishmael narrative. Ishmael was an archer in the wilderness who survived by the wells. Remember all the wells in Beersheba? And the Ishmaelites later purchased Joseph after he was placed in a well. And then Ishmael was predicted in Genesis chapter 16, verse 12, to be a wild donkey or a wild ass of a man who his hand would be against his brothers. So it's just really interesting here that Joseph, in this passage about Joseph, there seems to be a bunch of imagery here that seems very similar to what we read about Ishmael, and Joseph is connected to Ishmael because he was sold to the Ishmaelites. The problem is, even if you make that connection, it's still not clear what's being said here, right? I still don't understand what type of a blessing this is and what he's being blessed with, and what does it mean when it says the arms of his hands were made strong by the hand of mighty God? Is he saying that he was taken by the Ishmaelites, but God sustained him anyways in his captivity by the Ishmaelites? You know what I mean? Is that what is happening here? It's just really hard to say. But I think the last part, it says, from there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. That's the part that I really don't understand, because he's suggesting that somebody's going to come from the tribe of Joseph who's going to be a shepherd and like a rock, a foundation within Israel. Who in the world is that?
I don't know. David?
The only one I can think of is Jeroboam, the first king of the north, who came from Ephraim.
And if I remember correctly, this was being written around the time he was king, right?
Yep.
So they would have had an incentive to maybe include him in there?
Yeah, I think there's a kind of a note in here trying to say from the tribe of Joseph is going to come an awesome king. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, if that's not what it means, I don't know what else it means, but it does say the stone of Israel, and the northern 10 tribes, when they broke off, were the tribes of Israel, and then it was Judah in the south. So if we're talking about a rock, a shepherd of Israel, it makes sense that it would be referring to Jeroboam. And remember, everything else in this passage appears to be indicating that it was written shortly after the division of the kingdoms between Jeroboam and Rehoboam after Solomon.
So, just to say this again, when it says Joseph is a fruitful bough, now Joseph hears this and he's like, oh, he's talking about me? Or does he know he's talking about like my, my ancestors or whatever they call them?
It's hard to say if
children,
he's referring to the lineage or the person.
Right, yeah.
It's very confusing.
Because when I read this first, I just assumed, he was mentioning what all his children were going to be doing, because that makes sense because they're being blessed, and so that would affect them. But it's pretty obvious now that none of this has anything to do with them and just what they're doing later on in other generations, hundreds of years down the line. And if that's the case, I'm not even sure why they would even care to hear about this, right?
Right.
So Jacob's saying, hey, in 200-300 years, here's what's going to happen. And they're like, okay, what do I get now? Right?
Right. That's the weird. Okay, so that's a really good point. I'm glad you mentioned it, because in all of the other blessings, like they're blessed and they're given an inheritance, and it's like and we'll call it an immediate thing. It's a near future type of situation. In this narrative, none of these blessings are given to the children now. These are all future events. They don't actually get anything.
Right.
Here's the interesting thing, though, is remember this is all happening in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
No blessing for them to get.
Yeah, because he's already pretty great, right?
No. None of these kids, there's no blessing for them. They're not in the land. He can't give them anything.
Well, he must have like a bunch of money or something, right?
Well, you can give them money, but he can't bless them with the one thing that they actually want.
Land?
Well,
did he have land?
No.
I mean, before he went to Egypt.
Well, he would have sold it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, did he know? I mean, I don't think he knew that he was just going to stay in Egypt till he died, right?
I don't know.
I assume he still had the land, the deeds, or however that works.
I'm pretty sure in the narrative, he's told that his children will eventually leave, right? I kind of forget what we read in the last couple of chapters, but the fact of the matter is we don't know if Jacob knew his sons would be trapped in Egypt for a long time. Abraham was told of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know if Abraham told his son and his son told Jacob, but the fact of the matter is typically the blessing included a portion of the father's estate.
Okay.
The fact of the matter is the father has no estate, right?
So, I mean, they're all living in Goshen anyhow, right? So
right. So
does it matter?
So if Jacob was going to give a blessing, he had nothing to bless them with. So if he was going to bless his sons, it makes sense that the only blessing he could give them is something is far in the future.
Right. Yeah. And they probably wouldn't care about his blessing anyhow, right? I mean, they're doing good, aren't they?
Yeah, they're doing fine.
Yeah.
Look at the land of Goshen.
I mean, is that their land now? Can they give it to their children now? You know what I mean? No.
Kind of. They can live there, but it's not theirs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're still strangers in somebody else's land.
Strangers in a strange land.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, let's do 25, 26.
Yeah, let's try to finish this out, huh?
Yeah, good thing we're only doing one chapter this week.
Good thing.
Remember when we started this at like 7 o'clock?
Uh-huh.
You had all this hope that we were going to do like 2 chapters.
No, what I said was I'm going to spend the night and we're still going to do it. So I'm going to be here till about 1:30. So you better get some coffee.
We're like 2 hours in on the first chapter.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah. I love your optimism.
Yeah, I'm an optimistic guy. All right, 25 and 26. By the God of your father who will help you, and by the Almighty who will bless you, with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lie beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of your father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors, up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him who is separate from his brothers. Wow. I guess there's more. I should have kept reading. So this is more of the same, I guess. Yeah. All right, whatever. I don't know what to say. It's just more rare.
Yeah, so the tribe of Joseph, which is basically Ephraim and Manasseh, which basically is theoretically all of northern Israel, they get like this awesome blessing, right? This seems to be, referencing, glow, just like the southern tribe of Judah gets this glowing, reference. The tribes of Joseph get this glowing reference, so, which is odd because we wouldn't expect to see this unless we originally had a Judean narrative that was combined with a northern narrative. Because otherwise, Judah would only include their awesome blessing. And if it was written by the north would only include their awesome blessing. Right? But it seems to have awesome blessings for Joseph and for Judah, which leads me to believe that these were probably separate narratives that were just combined at a later time that included the blessings for both kingdoms, the north and the south.
That they just didn't hate each other?
That is possible.
You know what I mean?
Because you got to remember, at the time that this was written, or the time that the two narratives could have been combined, the combining of the narratives could have happened in the middle of the 8th century, when a lot of the Levites had traveled back south into the Judean hills and integrated back into society there, because of the incoming Assyrian invasion. And so if that's the case, remember, a lot of these Levites could have been northerners anyways. And so if the northern Levites are mixing with some of the priests from the south and they're joining forces to combine these narratives,
right?
You're like, well, we can't just throw yours out and I can't just throw mine out, so let's find a way to combine these things and make them work. And I think that's kind of what happened. Because you can't just throw out somebody's historical narrative.
Right. You'll be a lot of people are going to be upset with you.
Exactly.
And then this combining of the tribes ain't going to happen, right?
Right.
Be a lot of pissed off priests.
Yep.
And you don't want to get the priests upset, right?
You do not.
So grow the priests, so grow like the citizens, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? All right.
Let's talk about Benjamin.
Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. I'm surprised to see Benjamin kind of getting the shaft here. I guess after all that Joseph praising, Jacob's worn out. Hey Benjamin, how about we try this again tomorrow, assuming I haven't died? I'm sure I can think of something else to bless you with.
Yeah,
he's a good warrior and also generous. Neat. It's neat.
It is, yeah. It's a weird thing because Benjamin, as you said, is favored, right? And the only thing that's really said about him is that like he's going to be like super awesome military, which is true, by the way. So Benjamin was well known as being military fighters. The first judge of Israel in the book of Judges, which is Ehud, he was from Benjamin. And then the army of the Benjaminites took part in the war of Deborah's war. That's in Judges chapter 5. And during a civil war, it said that the tribe of Benjamin mustered 26,000 armed men with swords and 700 stone slingers, and then they fought against the forces of some of the other tribes in Judges chapter 20. So a lot of warriors came from the tribe of Benjamin. They provide a lot of skilled archers and valiant warriors in 1 Chronicles chapter 8, chapter 12, and also in 2 Samuel chapter 23. So like we saw before with the other tribe that had lots of valiant warriors, the tribe of Benjamin does ring true. It says that they're going to be a ravenous wolf. They're going to be awesome, and they're going to divide the war spoils. That does come true in the later narrative. So either, again, Jacob's super prophetic, or it was written during a time period where this tradition, of mighty warriors coming from Benjamin was true.
It's still just so tiny.
Yeah, they didn't get much of a blessing other than, hey, you're going to be like super good at fighting, right?
Yeah, and this is Benjamin we're talking about.
The baby.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Don't you think if Jacob was giving a fitting blessing, he would have said that your brothers are going to protect you,
Yeah.
and being that you're the youngest, and but he doesn't. He says, no, you're going to be an awesome military, and people are going to.
Probably because in the future when this was written, that's all Benjamin was known for, right?
Yep.
So they're like, well, that's truly what happened. He didn't make much of a name for himself.
That's right. That's why they're awesome warriors, because Jacob blessed them to be awesome warriors.
That makes sense.
Right?
Yeah.
All right, verse 28.
All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father spoke to them. And he blessed them. He blessed each one according to his own blessing. Of course, he blessed them according to their own blessing. Who else is going to bless them? Hey, Joseph, I want to share some of that blessing with your brothers who didn't get as much as you. That's what he's going to say.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So it said there were 12 tribes, which is kind of true. Simeon and Levi were combined during the blessing.
Right.
Which would make them 11 tribes, but I think it's okay to treat them as 12. I think that's what the text is trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
There were indeed 12 tribes. The only weird thing I had with this is that in the previous chapter, the blessings are given to the two children of Joseph, who are tribes that actually do get tribal allotments, right? And remember, Levi doesn't get a tribal allotment, which means there technically is only 11. That's why you have the Joseph is nixed, because Joseph's two sons get tribal allotment. So when you take away Levi and you take away Joseph, and then you add Ephraim and Manasseh, then you actually get 12 tribal allotments. But I don't know if that's what the author of this chapter is saying. I think they're literally just saying that these are the 12 sons that were blessed by Israel, even though it says these are the 12 tribes of Israel. That is kind of true, except that Joseph elsewhere in the Bible is never really mentioned as a tribe.
Mm-hmm.
There's like one or two mentions of Joseph as a tribe. Almost always it's Ephraim and Manasseh that are the tribes.
Real.
You know what I mean? So it's weird that here, for some reason, Joseph is a tribe. I think the reason why that is only because they're trying to stick to the actual sons, even though in later tradition, the 12 tribes are not exactly the sons.
Right.
But, 10
of them are.
What are you going to do?
Right?
Right, yeah.
And 2 are not. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. What are you going to do?
Not much.
All right, 29 to 33.
Mm-hmm.
Then he charged them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite as a possession for a burial place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. The field in the cave that is there was purchased from the sons of Heth. And when Jacob had finished commanding his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. He didn't bury, he didn't bury Rachel there?
What?
It says he buried Leah there. Where did Rachel die?
It says there, I buried Isaac and Rebekah, his wife, and there I buried Leah.
That's right.
And which is interesting because, as far as I can tell, Leah hasn't died in the narrative. Has she? Is the death of Leah recorded anywhere in Genesis so far?
Boy, I guess not.
Right? We can double check real quick. I don't recall Leah ever dying in Genesis yet.
Okay. But Rachel was buried elsewhere earlier, I guess. Or
Rachel was buried somewhat near there.
Okay.
So according to the Talmud, they give a story of her death, but I don't believe the Bible actually records the death of Leah, only of Rachel. Let's see. Yeah, I don't see anything in here about her unalivement.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's honored in this chapter. It says in the verse, Jason because his body be laid there. Also, Rachel. Right. Okay. So, anyways, she's not recorded. Her death is not recorded. What is recorded, however, in chapter 35 of Genesis is the death of Rachel. And Rachel is buried somewhat near the location, but not the location. So at first, when I read this, my mind literally read, "There I buried Rachel."
Okay.
And so I wrote a note on that. I said, I thought Rachel was buried in her own location in Bethlehem. Genesis 35 says so. It says, so Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrathah, that is Bethlehem. Over her tomb, Jacob set up a pillar, and to this day the pillar marks Rachel's tomb. And Bethlehem is on the way between where they were and where they were going, which is Hebron, right? So here it says, though, that the burial place was basically near Mamre or before Mamre, near Hebron. So anyways, the long and short of it is, the fact of the matter is, Rachel is not recorded as being buried in the same place as Isaac or Rebecca or Abraham.
Isn't that weird, especially if it's close by?
That's what I'm saying. It's nearby. It's about a 9-hour walk. I did the map.
Oh man, that's a long walk.
So
is that one way or?
Yeah, so one way. Okay, so if Rachel was buried in Bethlehem, and the ancestral burial site was about Mamre or Hebron, about a 9-hour walk from Bethlehem to Hebron. Okay. So it's weird that they didn't just carry her body the rest of the journey and bury her with the rest of the people, since that was Jacob's favored wife.
Right, yeah.
It's also weird that if Genesis 49 didn't confuse the two wives, right? If they literally meant to say there that Leah was buried, then why wasn't Leah's death ever recorded? And why is the unfavored wife buried with the ancestors and the favored wife not? Isn't that weird? It feels to me like there's some crossed wires.
Okay.
I don't know which wires, but something's just not right.
Rachel there then.
I think it meant to say Rachel initially, who was buried near the ancestral.
And so that's close enough for the author here.
Yeah, that's close
Do you think that Leah died after Jacob then, which is why it's not recorded?
We don't know.
I mean, that would make the most sense, right?
Well, here's the problem. In Genesis 35, we're not told of the death of Leah ever, right? So, as far as we can tell, Leah went down into Egypt with him, right?
Yes.
I've got the spreadsheet.
Well, yeah, I know this.
I mean, we assume. We don't know for sure, right? But let me get the spreadsheet.
Well, if you don't mention she's died, she's clearly still around.
Right. So it says in Genesis 46. Let's go back to Genesis 46 and read what it says. Because the summary says in Genesis 46:26, all the persons of Jacob's household went down, and there was a total of 70. And I think we reasoned that in order for that to make sense, the wives either would or would not have to go. And the sons of Leah were a bunch: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah. Okay. So we've got that. Well, we have to assume that I don't know that Leah was still alive, but
Well, yeah.
let me see if it says anything about wives in here. It says so Jacob left Beersheba and took Israel's two sons. I'm sorry. So Jacob left Beersheba, and Israel's sons took their father and their children and their wives. It didn't say anything about Jacob's wives and the carts. So in chapter 46, when it says they went down into Egypt, it says that they took the wives of the children, but doesn't say anything about Jacob's wives. And in fact, Jacob's wives don't show up anywhere else in the narrative after this, right? So I don't know. The last mention of Leah that we actually have in Genesis, let's grab the last time that she was mentioned. So she's mentioned here in chapter 49. And then the last time she was mentioned was in 46 actually. When they're saying who was born to who when they went down into Egypt. And we were just in 46. And she didn't really seem to exist. It says these were the sons of Leah, born to Jacob in Padan Aram, besides his daughter Dinah, and these are the sons and daughters. All were 30. These are the sons and daughters of his were 33 in all. So it never says actually that Leah went down into Egypt. We just assumed that she did. We don't actually know that she did.
She might have died earlier too, huh?
So it's possible that Leah, being the unfavored wife, just didn't even get a death narrative.
Right.
She's just one of the concubines. Poor Leah.
I know.
What a terrible what is it? I feel so bad for Leah.
Yeah.
She really got the shaft.
And she was ugly too.
She was ugly, she had the weird eyes.
Yeah.
And at least she got a bunch of babies.
Right.
But she couldn't even keep her son's mandrakes,
Right. Needed those mandrakes.
Gotta get the mandrakes. Anyways, I don't know. I'm confused about the whole burial of Leah just because we're not really told about the burial of Leah. It just kind of pops into this chapter out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It's
a weird thing.
Anyways, that's all my thoughts. I got no other thoughts.
Oh, yeah. I think I'm exhausted of thoughts.
Yeah. There's a lot there. And it wasn't, for most people, it's not very exciting stuff.
What? Crazy.
You couldn't tell at all, right?
But this is very exciting.
Very exciting, yeah. Most people don't want to go through tribal allotments or lineages.
Right, yeah.
But this is a warm-up for Exodus, because Exodus is going to have a whole lot.
Oh, boy.
We're going to talk about the vessels that go inside the tabernacle. We're going to talk about the measurements of the tabernacle. We're going to talk about the feasts, the feast days. It's going to get really data intensive.
Oh, that's great. I better drink a cup of coffee or something.
Yeah.
I'm liable to fall asleep.
For sure. I think that's all we have to say on this chapter, eh? Next week is the last. Ooh, excuse me. Next week is the last chapter, the final chapter.
Yeah, maybe. We'll probably do like half of it. It'll be 9:30.
Yeah, I know. In your mind, we're never going to finish Genesis.
That's right. Yeah.
We're going to get there. I was like 30 pounds heavier when we started this. If you go all the way back to like our very first episode.
I was 30 pounds lighter. There you go.
Oh, boy. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for being here. We're going to finish Genesis next week, and then we're going to do a roundup week of like questions and answers, things that we learned, questions that we still have, maybe some of the tidbits that we found the most interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, we'll move on to Exodus, and Exodus is going to be, it's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about concubines.
Even more than we already have, I guess.
Slave beatings.
At least Exodus is somewhat based in history.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Just a little.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot.
I mean, the covenant code in like Exodus 20 and 21 is considered to be the oldest narrative of law codes in the Bible, and I actually believe it. I think some of those laws actually originated from roughly
Well,
the time period.
listen. Out of 100%, which means it's all true, how much do you think Exodus was true, percentage-wise?
That's a good question. What percentage would I say is true? I give it at least 50%.
Okay, and what about Exodus?
That's what I just said. Exodus.
I was talking about Genesis.
Oh, Genesis?
Uh-oh.
Oh, almost none of it.
How much?
Genesis is all garbage.
Really?
The whole thing's fake.
All right, and Exodus is 50.
Yeah.
And what about, what's Exodus?
Book of Numbers way up. I think Book of Numbers is actually quite historical. In fact, I think the Book of Numbers has got almost more history than any of the 5 books of Moses. People don't give Numbers enough credit, but Numbers, I think, is quite historical.
All right, well, I look forward to that.
Should be good.
All right, have a good time, guys. Thanks for not watching, whatever.
Hey, we had one viewer.
We did, and
for 5 minutes.
Oh, don't tell me these things.
Dan, we're doing this for us.
Yeah, we're doing it for us.
For the love of the thing.
Love of the thing.
Right? I don't know what the thing is, but
knowledge, self-edification.
Knowledge is power. Self-edification. That's what it is.
That's right.
All right, guys.
Have fun.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. We'll see you